Hello, this is Michael Hexter. Welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So this episode I'm calling Liberals, Centrists, Media Establishment are still appeasing fascists, Results predictable. So this is a repetition or a reframing of a theme that I've brought up a number of times. In fact, it was the original impetus for this vlog, and my Politics 2100 blog also has some posts in this area as well. That there's a general lack of perceptiveness and self-awareness in the media and also among some liberal centrists who claim to be against and revolted by the fascist, neo-fascist GOP and Donald Trump, and they're disgusted by them. And on the other hand, they seem to be very ineffectual in terms of actually taking steps to combat the return of these people to power, or the increase, to stop the increase of their current power, noted, for instance, in the lack of indictments for Donald Trump and issuing from various attorneys general and also from the Congressional Committee to research January 6th. They seem to be very, very slow in bringing cases against and using the legal means at their disposal to bring to justice various lawbreakers among the neo-fascist GOP, or at least certainly the appearance of breaking the law, and potentially actually the breaking the laws of the United States in terms of things like sedition laws, or and also hampering judicial or hampering basically investigations, obstruction of justice, all of these potential legal charges. So, but this is going on in a background of media, and this, the focus of this particular episode is in a way on the media, but the results being also the media creates a normalization of fascism and of or the slow drip, drip, drip of fascists taking over power and increasing their power in the U.S. and and not being able to mount or not apparently being able to mount a serious counteroffensive politically to and also in the legal area to this ongoing push coming from the right wing. And so I'm really the current two inspirations for this particular episode are two. One, again, Thomas Zimmer, who is a visiting professor at Georgetown, a German Americanist, so someone who studies American politics and American history, but happens to be, from Germany, and but he is currently resident in the United States, and also Dan Froomkin, who is a press watcher, who I knew in college actually, but has continued in a very, I feel, distinguished and high quality career as a press analyst, an analyst of the U.S. media and journalism. And in any case, we have a media that is really has the memory of a firefly when it comes to uh, and the most recent Dan's Press Watch blog, his most recent post is about how basically the media drops the ball and essentially seems to want. He makes the case that the media seems to actually want, despite their own likely personal preferences, they seem to want a return of Trump to power, and they basically, by dressing up his and by forgetting his multiple obscenities with regard to his politicking and with regard to um, things that he said and done that indicate that he is, if anything, worse than he was when he was president, and in terms of his mental state, in terms of his respect for democracy, respect for rule of law, and anyway, and all the evidence that is accumulating that he orchestrated an actual coup, and is not being really prosecuted by the establishment, by Merrick Garland, or by the Justice Department, or by the Congress in actually creating a set of criminal charges that would then lead to an indictment of Trump. And so they are, in essence, the press is creating the grounds by which the Democrats can continue in their feckless strategy of appeasement of fascists, because the press creates the impression that these are really no big deal. That, in other words, that they would be being, quote unquote, hysterical or overly political by bringing, by at least those people who happen to be appointed by Democrats, who they're acting as, supposedly nonpartisan attorneys or prosecutors, but nevertheless are supposedly doing it based on the law and not on gaining political advantage. But yes, of course, there is a side benefit of political advantage if they were to convict or make charges stick to someone of the opposite party. But nevertheless, they're the Republicans are not going to waiting for the Republicans to investigate and prosecute their own in this regard is a fool's errand. So it's up to the Democrats. It falls to them. So, but anyway, their tendency is to appease, and I'm using the word appease with historical resonance in it, because appeasement was something that, for instance, Neville Chamberlain was in the 1930s was accused of in Great Britain, or at least in retrospect, was thought to appease Hitler and therefore enable his coming to power. And simply, I am using these words to say that the impulses of liberal politicians, and also the impulses of the reporters that create, even though the media is not officially a political instance, the media creates the framework for understanding and for communicating the discourse around which politicians then agitate in some degree. Now, politicians, if they're clever, if they're smart, they can, and if they're also principled, beyond being clever and smart, they can distort and change the frame of the discourse to fit better some higher moral principle that they represent, or some reality which they feel is underrepresented in the current dominant discourse. But the media are the discourse shapers, okay? And so they are shaping, they're framing the what's acceptable, what's thinkable, or what's speakable in public in Washington, D.C., and in the halls of power, at least publicly, by, in this case, and in Dan Froomkin's latest post, by minimizing and by normalizing Trump's uh, law breaking and fascistic, not only tendencies, uh, fascist politics. Okay, and by normalizing this, by they don't call it fascism, and they cloak it or they veil it. And was this piece that I wrote about a year ago, for Politics 2100 on the blog, that where this has been a long-term campaign of making the right wing appear to be much more respectable than it is, or much more, and doing PR, free PR for them, and they are granted in a way this great favor by the press, and and by doing this great favor to them, the press actually communicates, I believe, sotto voce, so implicitly, that they are the true, that they can really just get away with anything. In other words, that their sense of entitlement to power, entitlement to also to lie, to distort, to come is helped by exactly this passivity and efforts to appease the right wing. They appear, I believe, they are ultimately afraid that this is cowardice. They are afraid that in their private life, they're probably voting for Democrats, many of them, and whatever, maybe even, who knows, some might watch videos like mine on YouTube, with a similar political flavor to it. But anyway, but in their professional lives, and this is Dan gives a great rundown of how this works, or how this might work, or how it works in reality, but also what might underlie it, in terms of that basically professionally they see it as their duty in a way to create this false appearance of respectability, of minimizing the dangers of the right wing and of the GOP to democracy, and to really their jobs ultimately. The whole notion of a free press, of that their profession, their efforts to the Enlightenment bases of a job like a journalist. Okay, the idea that people should be informed, and they should use their rational minds to come to conclusions as citizens of a republic and a nation and a democracy, and anyway, so that project is endangered by exactly the thing that they are appeasing. Okay, and they are and this is where also Zimmer, Professor Zimmer, also points these things out in some of his more recent. He continues to, he talks about the neutrality that they attempt to adopt, among other things. I mean, and he's been incessantly reminding people about this, and I believe some of the urgency that he feels, and the freedom that he feels to talk about how fascistic the GOP is, comes from the experience of German fascism, even though he's much younger than someone who would have lived through that. But anyway, but that the freedom to look at the historical comparison, and why I'm using the word appeasement is that there are impulses, okay, that people have, A, as journalists, and also B, as I think liberal / centrist politicians, to decenter their own perspective or their own ideas about maybe liberalism in the sense of not American liberalism, but sort of liberal values, big picture liberal values, and to defer to people who um, are of the right wing of the and to also to not be so to be too comfortable also to fight, okay, to fight with these people, and to basically part of it is a little bit of is a class thing going on, that they don't want to dirty their hands with fighting with people who appear to be so power hungry and uneducated and illogical and crazy, and so they feel like it's not, I don't know if it's not quite fair, or so it's unseemly in a way. But I think also they are just also afraid because there's in the United States the right wing is heavily armed, so literally um, people are afraid for their lives. Reporters are afraid for their lives. Politicians are afraid for their lives. And the sooner that they recognize that fear, at least some of them will step out and say, "Look, I have to just face this fear, and I have to, and even speak to it." And I think it's important to speak to the fear of stochastic terrorism, because we have media figures, like for instance, in the latest um, efforts to attach the label pedophile to the Democrats and to or child pornography traffickers, or which is an outgrowth of the QAnon movement. It's not, but now it's become absolutely mainstream in the Republican Party, that these are calls for stochastic terrorism. It's not simple. I mean, they're also mostly mostly homophobic, transphobic, so forth and so on. Those are, I think, it's not a distraction to talk about those things, but the real, what's to me, what's the real political danger, or not, there are a bunch of political dangers, but the central political danger is that they're calling on a base of people. For instance, Tucker Carlson called on male or fathers to beat up teachers because they assumed he was making up a fantasy about how the teachers were sexualizing the children, or giving them impressions about sort of a sexual values that were alien to that they were, it was inappropriate, age inappropriate, and also that they would be off to they would be pro-gay or pro-trans or whatever it is, and that they would therefore be violent, be upsetting, or interfering with the relationship of parents to their children. So, and that therefore he was calling on these fathers to beat up parents, and so this. So I don't want to get down into the details of any given. I mean, this happens so frequently that, I mean, I'm just giving one example, and I don't want to get down in the weeds there. I just want to say that the importance is that there's a class of people who are fairly powerful, quite powerful, who are very comfortable, who are not fighting for the American people, not fighting for our democracy, who are afraid of losing their comforts, among other things, and losing their sometimes very, very lucrative, depending on who they are, lifestyles, like people like Nancy Pelosi or whatever it is. So in other words, they're very, very established bourgeois people who are not fighting for the American people, and not risking, unfortunately, the dangers of a population like we have, where there are many potential stochastic terrorists in them. And I'm not saying that they should court that danger unnecessarily, but they need to also acknowledge that they cannot appease the forces that are using that to intimidate, to and to create a false vision of the United States as being a monoculture, white monoculture, white nationalism, whatever you want to call it, white supremacy, not the nation that actually exists, that is multi-ethnic and needs to become more egalitarian in terms of sex, the relationship between the sexes, men and women, and needs to protect minority rights, and the violence that's visited on people who are vulnerable and marginalized is much too severe. So there's a whole bunch of tasks that need to be taken on, and the leaders need to face the fear and face what and be brave. So we need bravery, and we're not seeing lots of bravery in this area. So press needs to be braver, politicians need to be braver, and otherwise we were not going to have a democracy anymore. So anyway, I have spoken about this in other videos. I hope this video has some interesting angles in it for you. Please share your comments and thoughts below, and maybe we can discuss it there. Please like the video if you like it, or have think was a pretty good representation. And also, if you're enjoying Politics 2100 in general, please subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.